March for Science organizers don't want Bill Nye as leader because he is a white male. The March for Science is having a tough time deciding whether the march should focus on diversity and inclusion or health and climate policy. They were supposed to have gotten their internal issues under control, but this week, a new light broke out over whether Bill Nye the Science Guy, the former children's television host who considers himself the leader of the pro-science movement, should lead the protest. The problem? Nye is a white male. Nye, who is not in fact a scientist except on television, he's an engineer by trade, was slated to be the march's chair, and an announcement was made last week. But organizers quickly panicked that having Nye at the forefront of the event meant that they might be substantiating the idea that scientists are only white old men. Again, Nye actually isn't a scientist, but whatever. I love Bill Nye, said Stephanie Page, a member of the march's board, who was critical of what she considered the march's lack of diversity. But I do feel comfortable saying to you what I said to the steering committee. He is a white male, and in that way he does not represent the status quo of science of what it is to be a scientist. Well, he isn't a scientist. To round out the march's public face, then, the people in charge were forced to add 2 women of color as Nye's co-chairs, to put up a picture of science that did not just fit the white male image. But for his part, Nye just seemed sort of confused about the whole thing, telling BuzzFeed, "I was born a dorky white guy who became an engineer. I'm playing the hand I was dealt. This march can't solve every problem at once." Organizers insist that intersectionality and diversity must be part of this march because science seeks to improve communities, and one way to do that is to advocate for the marginalized and the oppressed. Unfortunately, it also makes the march as much about actual science as Bill Nye himself. The decision doesn't sit well with actual scientists who say that the march is supposed to bring attention to the Trump administration's environmental and research agenda, not a mishmash of progressive causes du jour. These scientists say that Trump is defunding important programs that address issues like climate change, devastating diseases, and space exploration, areas that need attention because of their national and global implications. The march is still going forward, and Nye has begun his publicity tour promoting the event alongside 2 new scientist co-chairs. Bill Nye had also appeared on Tucker Carlson's show a few weeks back to talk about climate change, and it seemed that he kind of pushed people who were a little skeptical about climate change and the human impact of it over the fence a little bit, and not in the way that he wanted to. In fact, I was listening to it with my fiance, and she ended up going, I wasn't very skeptical of climate change until I watched that interview where he just kind of kept dancing around the appeal to authority fallacies. I mean, if 97% of scientists say something's right, that must mean it's true, right? You don't even need to look at the evidence. 97% of a reputable source, which normally I would agree with. Nowadays, I would like to see the evidence itself, though. But the main issue with this exact statement, the 97% of scientists, is you then have to show a list of every scientist in the world and be able to say that 97 out of 100 would agree on one thing. And that's not always the case, even if a large majority of people do think climate change is a problem. And I'm not saying I do or don't think that, because I'm kind of on the fence. I'm open to hear the arguments. But let's take a look at some of the clips I found on Tucker Carlson Tonight. And then after Bill Nye, some people would argue, kind of made a fool out of himself and whatnot, he uploaded a response video, and we'll take a look at that as well. A few clips anyway.
Well, Bill Nye the Science Guy is now aspiring to a new title, Bill Nye the Psychoanalyst Guy. During a Facebook Live event with Senator Bernie Sanders today, the mechanical engineer and TV personality said skeptics of global warming suffer from the psychological delusion of cognitive dissonance. It's a slight bump up from last year when he was open to the idea of imprisoning skeptics, global warming, as war criminals.
Huh. Actual thought policing. That's lovely.
That's how
so
the
much
world
of
would
this
be
you
different
don't
if it
know.
weren't for humans.
You pretend that you know, but you don't know, and you bully people who ask you questions.
I really have to disagree with you. I spent a lot of time with this topic.
I'm open-minded. You are not, and we're out of time, unfortunately.
So,
thank you for joining us.
You guys are the mainstream media, and I can tell you why they're leaks. because the president has created two factions in his administration. They don't like each other, so they leak. It's not from the outside, it's from the inside. Carry on, Mr. Carlson. I'm sure we will cross paths again.
That's a very ominous thing to say. I don't know what it means, but come back anytime.
Better words have never been spoken from a mini-boss-like character that'll somehow make his way into the third act for sure. But now let's take a look at his response video that he made about less than a week maybe following this interview. It's quite amusing.
That from the scientific perspective, pick the number you like, 97% of the world scientists, very close to 100% of the world scientists, are very concerned about climate change.
It's funny, that's the very first thing he brings up. Makes me feel a little more skeptical, I have to say, but let's go on. I'm sure he'll speak some sense into me.
So somebody who understands this better than I do may observe that the media have divided into two camps.
I'm going to play that little clip for you again. But what he essentially just said is, here's my opinion, but somebody smarter than me would actually say it. It's kind of amusing.
So somebody who understands this better than I do may observe that the media have divided into two camps.
I mean, if it would take a smarter person than you to make that statement, then clearly you wouldn't be able to make it yourself, would you, Bill?
But from our point of view in the science and engineering side, you got to respect the facts at some level. You got to respect what is scientifically provable.
Well, maybe people just don't prescribe to your interpretation of the facts, because people can interpret the same sort of event a million different ways, and just saying the word science in front of it doesn't necessarily make it true automatically. We still have to answer those fundamental questions that our brain asks us. It's called critical thinking. It's part of science, actually.
And then, speaking of authorities and mistrust of authorities, the crowd at the inauguration, that was objectively smaller crowd than the crowd the next day at the Women's March. So,
what does that have to do with climate change?
If someone asserts that the crowd is bigger when it was clearly smaller, then everything else he or she says is subject to question.
While I don't disagree that you should maybe take something someone says with a grain of salt, especially when they have been known for fibbing in the past, this isn't new information for anyone with the lick of common sense. But that's a bit of a very specific example, isn't it, Mr. Nye? Not Dr. Nye, by the way.
And then as far as my thing with Mr. Carlson, I don't know. He used to not interview that way. He used to not just talk the whole time.
Right.
So
at what point would it have changed? And I'm just saying, you don't actually know because it's unknowable.
So
why aren't you open to questions?
This is how long it takes you to interrupt me, okay? It takes you quite a bit less than 6 seconds.
I go back again in a second, Mr. Carlson. If you have me on again, I'll come right back on.
Well, you haven't been back on, and it's been about a month or two. But I'll say this, Tucker does have a tendency to begin to interrupt. But I think, and this is me defending him, I do like his show, full disclosure. But I do think this is because he can detect when people are giving him a complete bullshit answer. And he has to also make sure he doesn't waste any time. He has an hour of primetime television to fill. He can't just let you filibuster your entire time on there. But, maybe you've got a good excuse brewing.
Bring it on, man. And you know what else, Mr. Carlson? I'll bet you $10,000 that 2010-2020 will be the hottest decade on record.
And Tucker did say this multiple times in that interview. We're not, and most of us people who are just asking for the facts, we're not saying that it's not getting warmer. What we are asking is to what degree is our interaction as humans changing it? And if it's really overbearing, if it's substantial, then wouldn't have all that happened in the Industrial Revolution when we were just pumping the entire atmosphere full of CO2? I'm going to go ahead and end the video there. The rest of this response video, or whatever you want to call it of his, is about a minute of him betting a bunch of people that work at Fox $10,000 that 2020 will be the hottest year on record. And again, I don't think anyone is disputing that climate change is real. Climate change is happening. Stuff is going on. What we're trying to argue and figure out amongst ourselves is how we go about measuring that sort of thing. How do we go about saying, okay, this is how much we're doing, this is what we have to change, this is what the direct effects are, and it is something that we should be working on. I mean, hell, that's an open job for somebody as far as I'm concerned. However, what I think a lot of people are concerned about is just pouring a ton of money into a broken system. Take a look at the public school system in America. You can put as much money in that as you want. It's not going to crank out kids that are smarter. Our current system is broken, and I do believe that's the same thing with a lot of our government agencies. There is no pressure on them to compete. Therefore, there typically are few innovations. Governments don't run very well, at least from my perspective. I haven't noticed a lot of times where I was like, that government agency, that one's running really good. It just doesn't seem to happen.